Finally, Frédérique, we have you on the Leaders Who Care series. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. I'm delighted to be here. Sorry it took so long.
Well, anticipation sometimes is exciting too. So we had that, and I'm super glad you're here, and people are going to see why you're here. So, if I may, Fred,
Of course.
thanks. If you can introduce yourself, but not the business part yet. Tell everybody who Fred is, where you're from originally, where you are now, family, maybe something you've never told anybody that you want to reveal now. That'd be kind of cool too. Stuff like that.
Yeah, I love that because in the Maori culture, which I've spent some time studying, they always say you're a who before you're a what, and they don't care about the what until you've told them about the who.
Right.
So yeah, I am. I live in Washington, D.C., which is where I was born, but I have two French parents and a whole lot of French family. So English was actually my third language. I learned French, then Spanish, then English when I started school in the US. Um, and I think personally, it's funny, I have this love-hate relationship with Washington, D.C., because I keep finding my way back here because when you are the daughter or the son of immigrants, you don't really have like deep ties anywhere. I always feel when I go back to France, all of my history is there. And so Washington is the closest thing I have to, any sort of like history in Washington, D.C. And of course, my parents are still here, but I find it to be just such an intense, crazy city, chock full of politicians and people who only lead with their CVs and what job they have and all the things. So that's why I say I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with this place. But I find that it's a remarkable place to meet people who want to just kind of change the world. And so you do meet some really interesting people here. So I feel very lucky that that I live here and that I'm working here these days and able to meet people on a weekly basis that, I mean, I probably meet 5 to 10 people a week that I wish I could be, new best friends with. But that's how many cool people there are walking around doing that's, just interesting work, I think, in DC.
And knowing you, I'm sure they have the same feeling, by the way.
I don't know about that, but what might people not know about me? Let's see. Something that might be relevant right now is I care very deeply about what's happening in Ukraine. When I was 15, I had placed out of all the languages that were offered in my high school. So I went to my parents and I said, okay, I think I want to learn a new language. What do you think about Mandarin? And my dad said, no, Frédérique, we have to put you in Russian. The Cold War, you must learn Russian. And I was like, really? I was like, okay. But there was nowhere to learn Russian in whatever year that was, 1990, 1988, something like that. And so my parents enrolled me at Georgetown University as a 15-year-old. In Saturday classes, I would go with the correspondence, and we were all of us just sitting there learning Russian. And so I then learned it from 15 all the way through high school. I studied it in college, and I knew that if I was ever going to become fluent, I had to go live there. And so I asked my parents if I could do a summer immersion program. And of course, they also said, that's ridiculous. Like, your college is already so expensive. You're just going to go live there. And so I was like, okay.
Oh,
So they literally shipped me to Ukraine for 3 months in Odessa to live with this family I had never met, who was absolutely amazing. And after those 3 months, I moved to St. Petersburg for a year to do a year of studying, obviously in Russian. So I needed to make sure I went to Ukraine to learn to speak fluently, to be able to pass my classes. Because now that you have a sense for my parents, there was no way they were paying for a 5th year of college. So I needed to get it right. So anyway, so I really genuinely love the culture of both Russia and Ukraine, and the people there are remarkable. And that's not something that I think a lot of folks know.
No, and that's especially heartwarming to me because my grandparents, my mom and my aunt, are from Kyiv originally, and we Canada, and we have still have, in fact, weirdly so, friends in Russia. as well, and makes for an interesting scenario there. But that is super cool. And you've got a family too, don't you?
I do. I've been married for, gosh, I don't know. I've lost track, like 23 years, 22 years. And I have 3 kids. I have two in high school and one still in elementary school. So
And they're learning languages?
yeah. So for them, well, except for the third one who's like, whatever. I'm not learning French. The first two, French was their first language. The third one's like, yeah, whatever.
C'est si bon, le joie de vivre, no? Well, speaking of kids then, so what were you like as a kid, a teenager? Were you a girly girl or a tomboy? Were you like organizing friends for lemonade stand or special causes? Were you playing sports, music? What was it? Or learning languages?
Well, I was in a lot of trouble a lot of the time, but mostly because I didn't like people telling me what to do, especially my mom. But I was a very motivated student. I loved school, and I took on a lot of leadership roles. I like to see, even as a kid, I would like to see problems and figure out how to solve them. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of how I was. I went to be honest, I went to an all-girls school from elementary school on. So there wasn't, well, I was distracted in plenty of other ways during the school day. It was very focused on school and academics and learning a lot about kind of women's accomplishments. So for me, that seemed very normal growing up. And I was also growing up at a time when, all of us were being told, go out and do whatever you want. You can now do anything you want. And so I was all in on that idea, to go out and figure out, what I was going to do.
No, I love it. I love it. We founded our firm, Fifth Element, on the basis that leaders in their businesses can do way better when they're doing good. And in my mind, from getting to know you, clearly are an early leader in understanding that. The experiences you've gained, Nextel, for example, global initiatives, your education that you talked about, the languages, and then all the way from consulting to your own businesses, and then starting Her Corner, helping entrepreneurs, and then more specifically women. What were you envisioning at the time? Were you just in it and thought this is going to go great, or did you have a vision?
For the last company, for Her Corner?
Well, Her Corner and going to Her Corner, even before that journey.
I often say Her Corner is like my accidental business, kind of like my third kid. I was not.
This is being recorded, by the way.
That's right. You won't see it, I hope. But I have always loved business. I love business. I love starting business. I love thinking about business. I went to business school. I was in consulting. I dream about business, how to make things better. And I always have since I was 8 years old. And I remember talking to my dad, who was an entrepreneur, and going anywhere and be like, what if they did this instead? And how would that, the reason I started Her Corner, and I had no idea it was going to turn into anything, was for myself. And I was very frustrated because I had worked for years in international consulting. I'd worked with multi-billion-dollar companies. I'd gone to business school. And here I was running and starting at the time, my third business, and it was hard. And I was very frustrated. I was like, why is this so stinking hard? Like, I've done a lot harder things, I think. And so I was, stomping around, upset, grumpy about how hard it was. And I sat down and I was like, this doesn't make sense to me, because more women are graduating from college over the last 2 decades than men. And more women were starting businesses than men at almost like a 2-to-1 ratio. And yet those businesses weren't thriving, and they were being started by women who had the education. So I couldn't understand why. Why were women's companies not thriving? And so the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, I think it's because women build businesses for different reasons than their male counterparts. Sometimes they started to prove it to themselves that they can. They want flexibility. They want a variety of different things, necessity. And I also thought that women build businesses differently. And so if you've ever met a guy who starts a business, generally speaking, they kind of go in and they're like all in. And if 2 years later the business isn't returning exactly what they expected, they're kind of out, right? Like it's a very, and they always have a guy, right? I got a guy for this. I got, who's your guy? You got this guy, whatever. And what I realized is that for women, often they're starting these businesses and the length is longer. Like the landing, the whatever it's called, the runway is longer. It could be 8 years before they're like, okay, now I have the time and I have something here to really run it up, and to scale it. And so, and also women don't tend to ask the same kind of questions. And so what I realize is if you bring women together in an environment that's not industry competitive, that they'll naturally want to help one another. And that actually they really want to learn how to scale their companies. And I was kind of thinking like, we're not teaching in business school how to grow small business. We're teaching how to raise billions to build the next Facebook so that business school gets a big cut of it, right?
Right.
So I
Right.
actually went to American University to teach for a year and a half in the business school and to figure out what are we teaching. And I was like, okay, well, I proved that hypothesis. So now let's build a business around how to teach women how to scale and how to do that together. So it wasn't me helping as a coach, but rather one to many. And so running these peer groups, bringing them the content, here's how you do it, here's how you think about it, and then expanding that to a variety of states. And I did that for about 10 years.
Yeah,
But I
that's
had no idea, by the way, it was going to be a thing. Like I just did it for myself.
well, you were in your corner, I guess.
I needed a corner.
Yeah, I know. Well, that it's so fascinating because well, when we were launched our firm, we launched on International Women's Day, and we were involved in a lot of women empowerment, leadership programs, etc. And everything we do is about diversity, including women, whether it's searches or projects. And I saw a quote I really loved. Um, I don't know from when we were talking or research I had, but it was about equal access to opportunity. And this was from a participant in your Fur Corner Accelerator. And she said, I haven't felt that much female unity since my Pee Wee League floor hockey team won the championship. And being a big hockey fan, that caught my eye also, just, total full disclosure. But I thought that was brilliant. And you talked about women helping women together, and you talked about team, and we so value belonging that fills our hearts and souls more than anything. So
Totally.
with that said, can you describe further your journey as a woman, in diverse partnerships, but also on boards where you're the only one, or executives when you're the only one, or always when you're the only one, if you will? How did you navigate? How did you thrive? You must have had moments, right?
Oh, I mean, I think everyone has, frankly, man or woman, but I think that the differences for women is, um, it is just different. Meaning when I was first starting out in management consulting, for example, I was told not to carry a purse and not to have photos of my family and to not even talk about a family. Even if I didn't have one yet, to not talk about wanting one. Um,
Oh yeah, for
and
sure.
it was, yes, like I grew up professionally at a time where we could do anything, but you were doing it while acting like a guy.
Right.
So all my mentors were men. All my mentors actually, for the most part, are still men, actually, because of that's generationally where I grew up, and because I didn't really care. I was like, well, if it worked for you, I'm going to figure out how to make it work for me. And that has worked in some ways because I was very comfortable being the only woman. I was very comfortable speaking up. I didn't give a rip if there was nobody else at the table but me. It's worked in other ways. It has not worked in certain ways because, you know, it still isn't completely equitable in the workplace. And so even though it seemed on paper as though we had reached a place of gender equality professionally, there were still many things that were not the same. Um, and so that's just kind of the path that I've had to walk. But part of how I think about it is trying to understand what's still broken and how do we make it better. And that's something, like I said, since 8 years old, every time I see something, I'm like, I wonder if we could make it better. And the truth, I think, as you suggested, is it's around community. It's around, in my experience, there's power in female alliance, like no kidding power, whether it's you're talking about a movement like the Me Too movement, or whether you're talking about what I built that was around helping women scale their companies. There's power in alliance between women. And part of what I hope to see is that we begin to think about alliance more collectively, rather than like, this group is doing this and this group is doing this and this group is doing that, right?
Yeah, I agree. And, I was pretty fortunate. I had some great female mentors, interesting enough, even when I was at Deloitte. But I remember when one of them got pregnant, and she had 5 clients. I worked on, I think, 3 of them, audit, consulting, whatever. And she had a baby, and she asked if she could come back, but except for you work on 3 clients, and that way only 2 would have to be transferred to someone else. And they said, no, that's not what we do. And I was no visionary or whatnot, but I said, and I wasn't like this major leader, but I felt I had to stand up. I said, this doesn't even make sense business-wise. You're going to lose her, and then you're gonna have to transition 5 clients instead to someone else, etc. But that's the way it's done. Sorry. So they did lose her. And it, even business sense, it was amazed me that you're going to stick to the rule of the manual. I would always ask, well, did God write the manual? I don't understand why something can change there.
The manual.
Good example.
The man-UAL.
I hadn't thought of that. Good one. So it's we've come a long way, but there's still a lot more to do, for sure. And on a similar topic, but moving forward, the 4th Industrial Revolution is really about technology. AI going crazy right now in all sorts of directions, AR, VR, etc. But they say that the 5th one is really about humanity, and which is half the reason we were called Fifth Element, actually, is because of that. Share with us the experiences and accomplishments you've had that gave you the strong foundation, as well as the passion and interest in women and business, to this point where you are now in the position of the CEO of the National Women's History Museum. Let's start with that.
Are you asking me like what human elements led me here?
Well, I'm asking both. I'm asking your human element and also the experiences you've had that gave you the strong foundation to both have the, want to lead an organization like this, and the difference you want to, and the difference you believe you can make because of the experiences you've had.
Well, I think that, whenever I'm talking to young women or men who are trying in late mid-20s, early 30s, trying to kind of think about kind of their path and their direction, I always tell people to look for the common threads. And everyone has a common thread that runs through their life. And the common thread always, for me, was equality and empowerment for women. And so whether I was in grade school or in college, or I remember the first day of college, I had to take a mandatory class in English, and the professor—
mandatory.
A mandatory. What is it? What?
I don't know where this is going. Oh my gosh.
Changed my whole vocabulary. A mandatory English class, and the professor said at the end of it, hey, you and you stay after class. And so we did. And he said, I've been teaching here for 20 years, and I take an informal poll the first day of this class every year. How many of you went to all women's high schools? And we were like, me. And so it was interesting, right? Because clearly my thread started a long time ago, where that's how I always showed up, with kind of a desire for equality and equity. And then professionally leading the women in consulting, or women in this, and like just trying to encourage women to believe, frankly, that they could. Right. And that's what I found was the common thread that it's this need to inspire women, whether it was to build their businesses, to believe that they could stay and take in a corporate environment and thrive, to right. That was my common thread. It's this ability to inspire. And it was really kind of what led me to the National Women's History Museum, because as you know, I mean, I don't come from a museum background. I've heard the term is museum adjacent. I had no idea. So apparently I'm museum adjacent. I'm not, I'm not a curator, I'm not a historian, but when I thought about this opportunity, what I realized is that by teaching women's history and women's accomplishments, and by getting those accomplishments to either educators to teach in grade school or to women directly through technology, what you're doing is you're creating a sense of efficacy in that person. And that efficacy is how you begin to build on, hopefully, your ability to compel her to act and to be inspired to act. And I don't care how she acts. I don't care if her action is asking for a raise or pursuing a graduate degree or, you know, the pillars of equality are, we got to move all of them, right? So, but that has been the thread, this desire to compel women to act in order to advance equality. And that's really what brought me to the National Women's History Museum and how I see my role. I'm not the one that's going to create best in class, you know, historical biographies. Like, we have historians and educators for that. But I am trying to make sure that content gets to the right audiences in the right ways, that they consume information in the hopes that we can compel young women and girls to act.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Kind of truly what a leader who cares should be doing. You can't. I interviewed the CEO almost a year ago now, and he just spoke to me again. But back then he said, I'm having the most fun being a CEO now. I can be emotional, I can be vulnerable. I don't have to pretend to know everything, and I can actually trust people to get stuff done. And he's loving his position right now. It doesn't mean it's easy still, but it's a lot of what you're saying there is, you know how to, I think you're inspiring people to, and not just girls, I think even boys, to see what great women have done and are doing right now. How can men and women support you and the National Women's History Museum?
I think it starts by being curious, and really realizing, I'll give you a very simple example that I bet applies to everybody. I was meeting with a woman the other day who owns a global self-defense company. And I asked her, I said, I have a little boy who's 10. If I put him in a self-defense class, because according to her, that's step one, everybody should know how to say no, boys or girls, and protect themselves, right? I said, isn't he going to just go in and want to just, be physical because he's a 10-year-old boy? And so should I put him with other boys, or should I put him with boys and girls? And she said, it's remarkable how at 10 years old, putting boys and girls together in a self-defense class can change their paradigm, because the boys all of a sudden realize that the girls are much stronger than they already assume at 10 years old. And the girls realize that the boys have vulnerabilities, even though already at 10, the boys are walking around like they're all tough and whatever, right? And so when you realize what is already happening since you and I were 10 and maybe earlier, I think the first thing that people need to do is be curious and ask themselves, I wonder what I've been holding on to or thinking that women can or can't do, or why something is this way or that way. And just actually, the first thing you can do is just recognize, hey, it is pretty ridiculous that only 15% of what's taught across this country in social studies and history classes is about women. And by the way, half of that is in a domestic capacity. So while we count Martha Washington in that 15%, she's often mentioned because she was married to George, right? So it starts by being like, wait a second, this is ridiculous. Like, where are the women? Like, what, why, right? That's step one. And then it's about saying, well, how does this apply to me? And that's what everybody's trying to figure out. If I got smarter on these accomplishments, on these histories, on these stories, how does that apply to me? And that's different for everyone. For some people who have young girls, it applies to them because they want to understand the path that their girls are on. For some people who are leaders, they want to have examples at the top of their fingertips that they can point to, more than just Susan B. Anthony and Harriet Tubman, you know, or whatever, very few women that many of us were taught about. So, and then for others, it's just kind of it's like, it's against their values that this has been happening. And it's a general belief that maybe they've seen women leaders thrive, or they've seen women investors deliver better results. And they actually want to get involved with us by being supporters and sponsors and funders, because they understand that if we can move this content and information, then we're going to shrink that gender equality gap more quickly.
And it's going to benefit everybody.
Yeah. But you have to start where you are, you know?
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. And by the way, my boys, when they were younger, played ice hockey against girls' teams, and they weren't supposed to hit, but the girls were pounding them all the time on the ice. It was incredible.
Yeah.
But they learned a lot, just like what you're saying reminded me of that. They learned a lot about each other just even by playing sports together like that. Well, I got one last question on this, because you know what they say in LA, you got to leave them wanting more so you can do a sequel. So that's
yeah. What do they say in Washington? I don't even know.
They say a lot of things in DC.
Most of which might not be true.
Right. So one question here, I remember in 2021, a client asked me, or told me, he said, you know, Mark, the year 2020 was the year that flew by slowly. I said, that was pretty cool. And it's almost, people say like 2020, they feel like it's years ago, and it was yesterday still at the same time. With all that said, and now 2021 past 22, and we're heading to the end of 23 already, what are you most grateful for? And also, what are you most hopeful for?
I am grateful for this role, for this position, even though, you know, the first 6 months were hard. I'm grateful for the opportunity to do the work that I do. I'm grateful I have a great family that, you know, supports it and doesn't grumble that I love the work that I do. And my daughter comes with me to everything. My sons march with me. My husband's reading all the books and getting as smart as he can. You know, there's so much I'm grateful for. I would sum up my gratitude around potential. I'm so grateful for potential. I'm hopeful for alliances. Honestly, I genuinely think that it's only in coming together, as you said, in community or in other ways, that we will resolve and solve together. Because the downside, frankly, to COVID, that experience, is what I perceive as a lot more of, you know, insular thinking, or, you know, removing oneself from conversations, a lot of people staying home more and watching movies at home, and, you know, so that behavior does not serve us in terms of solving together and being together.
No, that's great. Yeah, well said. Thank you for sharing that. That's really cool. And thank you for being a leader who cares. And thank you for being a friend and everything else. So really appreciate you being on the series.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate you and you inviting me to be here today. This was great.
Yeah, thanks.